The grand narrative of the turmoil violently erupts following the conclusion of the Villainess Gets What She Deserves story with a rank B victory. The very first epic episode of this chaotic martial saga officially commences. Imposing architecture looms silently overhead as an unpredictable new chapter of destiny begins to swiftly unfold. Two fierce combatants clash in a blinding blur of motion, sending heavy shockwaves echoing through the expansive training grounds. Aletta abruptly halts her relentless physical assault and apologizes profusely, anxiously checking if her battered opponent survived the crushing strike. Groaning in sheer agony, her sparring partner violently clutches his injury while Aletta realizes she severely underestimated her terrifying, raw power. Inspecting her trembling fists with utter bewilderment, the mighty warrior questions if her monstrous physical strength has suddenly spiked yet again. Her heavily bruised companion sighs in absolute exasperation, completely rejecting her oblivious, innocent attempt at playing the helpless victim. He strictly commands her to remain vigilant, loudly declaring that mastering the vast power gap between her and regular opponents is her ultimate challenge. Fiercely resolving to conquer her overwhelming, unyielding strength, Aletta vehemently promises to push her limits under his watchful, experienced gaze. 16-year-old Aletta of the martial house Bergheiz stands tall, having boldly journeyed from her rugged border territory to conquer the prestigious Royal Academy. However, buried deep within her formidable mind are the vivid, startling memories of her previous, mundane life as an ordinary Japanese high school student. Thrust into a confusing, unforgiving world devoid of familiar logic, she quickly realizes this harsh reality is not from any predictable novel or game. Remembering her past life's absolute obsession with brutal muscle training and endless stamina, she proudly embraces her inherent physical supremacy. Severely lacking any brilliant academic knowledge from her past life, she fully accepts that her unyielding bodily strength is her sole weapon. She brutally dismisses her past life's memories as utterly meaningless, silently wondering why the universe bothered reincarnating a simple fitness fanatic. Suddenly, a brilliant flicker of fierce, unyielding determination ignites within her sharp eyes as she heavily reconsiders her unique, magical situation. Thrilled to inhabit a body overflowing with limitless martial talent, she violently pushes her physical limits every single day without anyone interfering. Basking in the absolute glory of unhindered, obsessive training, the reborn warrior happily admits that she struck solid gold with this powerful new life. A sharp, booming voice instantly shatters her peaceful internal monologue as a highly familiar figure furiously calls out her name. Caught completely off guard, Aletta shrieks in sudden surrender as an intense, flawless grappling maneuver forces her to frantically tap out. Standing victoriously over her defeated form, Frio loudly sighs in deep frustration and glares down at his relentlessly reckless childhood friend. Furious at her sheer lack of mental focus, he savagely reprimands her for dangerously zoning out in the middle of executing a deadly combat maneuver. 18-year-old Frio Brandon viciously teases her, mocking his shattered hope that the Academy's elite noble ladies would finally refine her feral nature. As her fiercely protective guardian and a mighty student of the elite night course, Frio carefully watches over her chaotic progression through the academy. Bound by deeply entrenched family ties from their neighboring territories, the two powerful warriors share an unbreakable, lifelong bond. Acting as her absolute guardian in this complex aristocratic world, Frio efficiently signs her administrative paperwork while she stares on in utter confusion. Deeply relieved of the crushing burden of academy bureaucracy, Aletta gratefully thanks the exasperated Frio for his relentless, vital support. Shifting the intense focus to an impending royal crisis, Frio nervously questions if she can survive the upcoming, high-stakes party attended by the king and queen. Terrified of her destructive clumsiness, he reveals his agonizing fear since he will be entirely absent, brutally subjugating monsters instead of protecting her. Brimming with unshakable, fiery confidence, Aletta brightly flashes a fearless smile and practically guarantees her absolute perfection at the royal gathering. She dramatically boasts that she was rigorously forged into a proper lady by the elegant Lady Madeline, completely shocking her highly doubtful friend. Seeing right through her confident facade, Frio deadpans that she is hopelessly entranced by the overwhelming charm of Duchess Madeline's glorious daughter. Aletta blushes furiously, completely unable to hide her sheer awe of the impossibly kind, fiercely beautiful and dignified noblewoman. Exploding with fierce, undeniable girlish pride, Aletta passionately defends her absolute right to faithfully worship her ultimate ideal of a perfect princess. Frio smirks knowingly, silently pondering the terrifying irony of a battle-crazed powerhouse obsessively idolizing a delicate, ideal princess. He quietly marvels at Madeline's terrifying, unmatched power to instill noble manners into the feral Aletta, realizing the two are a dangerously perfect match. Suddenly, a deafening wave of screaming fans spectacularly erupts across the academy grounds as the dazzling Lady Madeline makes her majestic entrance. Overcome with fanatical devotion, Aletta desperately curses this magical, backward world for its frustrating lack of smartphones to record her idol's blinding beauty. Radiating pure, absolute aristocratic grace, the stunning Lady Madeline gracefully approaches the awestruck Aletta and delivers a flawlessly elegant greeting. Admiring the elegant attire, Margaret warmly praises a beautiful dress and notes how perfectly it suits her companion. Beaming with sheer joy, Lady Flora and Lady Elena express their deep gratitude for the generous compliments. Watching the demonstration closely, Madeline highly praises Aletta's beautiful walk and officially declares that she passes. Bowing in deep respect, Aletta passionately thanks Lady Madeline for molding her into the refined person she is today. Radiating an aura of unwavering grace, 17-year-old Duchess's daughter Madeline Albarasso stands as a dependable older sister figure. Flashing back to her turbulent early academy days, Aletta vividly remembers her initial struggles as an overwhelmed newcomer. Frustrated and hopelessly uncoordinated, she furiously battles her tight corset while struggling to balance in painful heels. Completely overwhelmed by the demanding noble attire, Aletta anxiously laments that she had never even worn a dress before. Feeling utterly defeated, she admits stamina is her only real strength as a supportive voice reminds her that beginners always stumble. Acknowledging Aletta's highly unusual family background, the elegant noblewoman steps forward to offer her reassuring presence. Displaying remarkable generosity, Madeline firmly volunteers to personally instruct the struggling girl in the ways of high society. Ever since that fateful encounter, Lady Madeline has tirelessly watched over Aletta with countless acts of patient guidance. Gazing at her graceful mentor, Aletta deeply reveres Madeline as both a cherished benefactor and a profound personal inspiration. Blushing slightly while averting her gaze, Madeline modestly insists that the impressive improvement stems entirely from Aletta's own hard work. Thoroughly charmed by this classic tsundere behavior, Aletta feels her heart melt with immense affection for her beloved mentor. Fueled by that unwavering support, Aletta tightly clenches her fists and fiercely resolves to keep giving her absolute best. Suddenly distracted by a loud commotion, Aletta turns her head and wonders what is causing such a disruptive noise. Searching for the source of the clamor, she spots a massive, tense gathering quickly forming inside the grand hall. The murmuring crowd slowly parts as an intense, suffocating atmosphere immediately swallows the entire room. Bursting with sudden fury, Prince Alan fiercely glares at Rhaenburg and loudly condemns her supposedly intolerable conduct. Pointing a dramatic and accusing finger, the furious prince forcefully declares their royal engagement broken from this very moment. Struck with pure shock, a visibly bewildered Rhaen gasps at the sudden and devastating public rejection. Staring intently at the aggressive Prince Alan, she desperately demands to know the actual meaning behind his harsh words. Completely unmoved by her confusion, Alan furiously accuses Rhaen of hiding behind her noble status to viciously abuse Lisa. Maintaining her stoic composure, Rhaen firmly denies the baseless accusations while reminding him of their officially arranged engagement. Desperate to maintain proper order, Rhaen pointedly asks if the impulsive prince has obtained His Majesty's permission for this action. Refusing to back down, Alan furiously orders her not to change the subject while insisting his drastic decision is final. Whispers violently erupt among the onlookers regarding the prince's scandalous half-year infatuation with a baron's daughter despite his arranged fiancée. Frozen in absolute shock, Aletta's eyes widen massively as a terrifying realization suddenly pierces her mind. Staring intensely at the chaotic scene, she finally recognizes the timid Lisa Ruggia standing closely beside Crown Prince Alan. Shifting her gaze to the prime accused, Aletta instantly identifies the stoic Villainess as the infamous Rhaenburg. A massive wave of past memories floods Aletta's brain as she realizes she has actually played through this exact scenario before. She recognizes her current reality as the exact world of a popular Otome game featuring Lisa as the commoner-born heroine. Remembering her past life obsessively, Aletta enthusiastically recalls clearing every single character route in that highly famous game. Shaking her head in sheer disbelief, She frantically tries to process the terrifying fact that she is physically trapped inside a dating sim. Breaking her racing thoughts, Prince Alan aggressively commands the disgraced Rain to apologize to Lisa immediately. Trembling in absolute terror, Lisa shrinks back and nervously stutters the prince's name in complete, overwhelming confusion. Baffled by the deeply weird unfolding drama, Aletta wonders why the supposed heroine looks as if the world is suddenly ending. Quickly analyzing the scripted event, Aletta correctly identifies this exact moment as the infamous Villainess condemnation scene from the Crown Prince's route. Yielding calmly to the inevitable, an unfazed Rain sighs heavily and orders an attendant to bring something forward. Presenting her flawless conduct record, an unwavering Rain calmly challenges Prince Alan to verify the royal family's own surveillance regarding the false bullying allegations. Furious at her bold defiance, an enraged Prince Alan aggressively accuses Rain of mocking the royal family and fabricating pathetic excuses. Screaming over the stunned crowd, the irrational prince completely ignores the lack of evidence and ruthlessly sentences Rain to immediate exile. Bowing her head in quiet submission, an unfazed Rain simply accepts the devastating royal decree without a single word of protest. Watching from the chaotic sidelines, a thoroughly bewildered Aletta mentally screams in shock at the Villainess's sudden, passive surrender. Quickly analyzing the shifting narrative, Aletta nervously notes that Rain's uncharacteristic submission perfectly mirrors the classic setup of a villainous revenge novel. As loyal attendants tearfully beg to share her exile, an excited Aletta wonders if Rain is secretly a reincarnated soul manipulating the story tropes. Shattering the tense royal standoff, a desperate female voice violently screams Lord Louis's name across the grand hall. The sudden, anguished cry catches everyone completely off guard, whipping heads around toward the shocking interruption. Stepping forward with absolute, undeniable authority, a regal figure abruptly halts the proceedings and commands Rain to ignore the foolish exile order. Gasps of sheer terror echo through the paralyzed crowd as the kingdom's mighty king makes a dramatic, unexpected entrance. Trembling beneath his father's crushing, furious glare, a panicked Prince Alan stammers weakly as the king demands immediate answers. Refusing to entertain any pathetic excuses, the stern monarch swiftly confines his disgraced son to his quarters pending a final, brutal judgment. Executing the absolute royal command without hesitation, heavily armored guards forcefully apprehend the foolish prince and his terrified accomplices. A heavy, suffocating silence blankets the majestic hall as the royal guards drag the bewildered conspirators out of sight. Turning his majestic gaze toward the wrongfully accused Villainess, the deeply remorseful king solemnly apologizes for his son's inexcusable crimes. Bowing deeply in profound reverence, a humbled Rain gracefully begs the mighty ruler not to lower his royal dignity on her account. Acknowledging the kingdom's catastrophic failure, the somber king officially declares the absolute dissolution of Rain's royal engagement. Regretfully explaining their past optimism, the king admits they foolishly hoped Rain's unparalleled kindness would eventually reform his disastrous son. Seeking to make immediate amends, the generous monarch publicly offers to grant the wronged lady absolutely any desire she wishes as compensation. Snapping back to a terrifying reality, a frantic girl frantically screams for Lord Louis to stop and acknowledge her presence. Standing frozen in pure horror, the screaming girl aggressively reminds the silent, stoic Lord Louis that he is legally her fiancé. Watching the bizarre romantic catastrophe unfold, a deeply confused Aletta wonders how the Villainess magically ended up with another character's fiancé. Struggling desperately to recall the game's convoluted lore, Aletta's mind spins wildly as she tries to piece together Lord Louis's original storyline. Suddenly overwhelmed by a sickening wave of extreme dizziness, Aletta realizes her fragile physical condition is rapidly and dangerously deteriorating. Gripping her throbbing head in agony, Aletta's overloaded brain completely short-circuits from the massive, crushing influx of shocking narrative deviations. Pure panic violently erupts as a terrified voice desperately begs the rapidly collapsing Aletta to stay conscious and fight the darkness. Her vision violently blurring into an inescapable void, a fading Aletta dimly registers the frantic, desperate pleas anchoring her to reality. Slipping helplessly out of consciousness, she bitterly laments becoming a dramatic casualty when she isn't even a named character in this chaotic Otome game. Alerting the highly distracted monarch, a deeply worried noble hastily interrupts to inform the king that a young lady has suddenly collapsed. Waving off the irritating interruption, the pragmatic king coldly orders the medical staff to handle the trivial fainting spell without bothering him. Annoyed by the rapidly escalating commotion, The irritated king demands to know why his royal subjects are panicking over such a minor incident. Stammering in sheer, unadulterated terror, a nervous official urgently points out the highly significant identity of the young man holding the unconscious girl. Grumbling about the annoying inconvenience, the king casually assumes the young man will just have to abandon his current, foolish romantic pursuits. The narrative sharply shifts, revealing the fiercely protective young man as Louis Northrat, a marquis's son and the crown prince's personal royal guard. Whispers of absolute disbelief violently ripple through the stunned crowd as they process the explosive, scandalous revelation of his hidden fiancée. Staring at the chaotic, unfolding scene in utter disbelief, the deeply shocked onlookers struggle to accept the identity of the fragile, collapsed girl. A tense, suffocating silence hangs heavily over the grand royal court as the dramatic, world-shifting weight of the situation finally sinks in. The shocking truth is finally unveiled, identifying the frail, unconscious girl in Louis's arms as Aletta, the cherished daughter of Viscount Bergheitz. Trembling with sudden, overwhelming dread, the previously confident and arrogant nobles stutter the fearsome Bergheit's name in absolute, unmitigated terror. The story officially resumes with a vibrant title page proudly bearing the Sanaa-Scan's mark. 16-year-old Aletta Bergheitz thoroughly introduces herself as a reincarnated soul burdened with utterly useless knowledge from her previous life. Reflecting on the previous day's chaotic party, she vividly recalls witnessing Crown Prince Alan publicly condemn the stoic Lady Rain. The massive shock of the intense royal confrontation forced Aletta to realize she was actually trapped inside the Otome game from her past life. She mentally visualizes the vibrant title screen of Embracing Seven-Colored Love, the exact dating sim she once obsessed over. To her utter bewilderment, the trembling heroine Lisa and the dazzlingly defiant villainous Rain completely derailed the game's original, predictable scenario. Aletta realizes her total detachment from the dramatic plot stems from the fact that her name and territory never once appeared in the main game. Remaining a complete background character, she previously possessed absolutely no reason to ever suspect she inhabited a fictional game world. Shattering her peaceful ignorance, her very own fiancé inexplicably rushed to support the villainous right after the massive condemnation event. Frustration violently grips Aletta as she questions how the infamous Villainess miraculously ended up stealing her arranged fiancé. Completely overwhelmed by the massive influx of impossible information, a mentally exhausted Aletta fully surrendered to the surrounding chaos. Her overloaded brain forced her to collapse entirely, resulting in a dead-like slumber inside the quiet academy infirmary for an entire day. Staring blankly at a blank parchment, a groggy Aletta desperately struggles to draft a coherent incident report for her distant family. She reflects on her strictly political engagement to Louis Northrat, arranged 2 years prior to strengthen vital ties with the central nobility. Having exchanged mere letters and fleeting glances, Aletta honestly admits she barely knows the true, hidden character of her distant fiancé. Sighing heavily at his blatant disregard for their noble contract, she laments placing her blind trust in her parents' official judgment. Pondering her wording, she vehemently wishes to prevent anyone from mistakenly believing she suffered emotional heartbreak from the public rejection. A sudden, polite knock interrupts her gloomy thoughts as Margaret cheerfully asks if her recovering friend is finally awake. Beaming with genuine relief, a deeply worried Margaret eagerly steps into the quiet infirmary room to check on Aletta. Examining her friend closely, Margaret gently inquires about Aletta's health while specifically noting her unusually pale complexion. Stretching her rested muscles, Aletta brightly reassures her anxious friend that a massive amount of sleep left her feeling absolutely fantastic. Smiling brightly at the excellent news, a thoughtful Margaret presents a delicious plate of fresh sandwiches for the hungry patient. Drooling slightly at the welcome sight, a ravenous Aletta eagerly admits she was just preparing to raid the academy dining hall. Devouring the hearty meal, an intensely curious Aletta presses Margaret for the exact details of the chaotic aftermath following her sudden collapse. Recalling the explosive fallout, Margaret reveals that His Majesty swiftly slapped Crown Prince Alan and his foolish followers with strict confinement orders. Nodding in complete agreement, Aletta logically points out that falsely accusing a royal fiancé naturally invites severe and immediate punishment. Shifting the focus to the terrified heroine, Aletta cautiously asks if Lisa Ruggia faced similar disciplinary actions for her supposed involvement. Clarifying the heroine's total innocence, Margaret explains that a completely ignorant Lisa remained entirely in the dark regarding the prince's disastrous scheme. Completely shattered by the terrifying royal ordeal, A traumatized Lisa currently spends her time desperately pleading to enter a secluded convent. Feeling a sudden pang of genuine sympathy, Margaret recalls how the Academy previously labeled the overwhelmed heroine as a shameless, man-obsessed woman. The girls acknowledge the immense pressure placed on a former commoner who suddenly received overwhelming, special attention from aggressive royal suitors. Aletta grimly notes that a sheltered commoner naturally falls into dangerous illusions when entirely ignorant of the terrifying ruthlessness of high nobility. Noting Lisa's recent attempts to distance herself from the overbearing princes, Margaret confidently predicts the innocent girl will successfully avoid any severe punishment. Shifting to the real crisis, Margaret seriously warns that the defiant Louis Northrat and Lady Rain currently face far more dangerous consequences. The entire royal capital fiercely erupts with widespread criticism, fueled by terrifying rumors that the formidable House Bergheitz has been deeply angered. Sweating nervously at the massive political implications, a panicked Aletta desperately wishes to prevent the scandalous incident from escalating any further. Giving her friend a highly skeptical look, Margaret bluntly shatters Aletta's naive hopes by declaring such a peaceful resolution completely impossible. Suddenly recalling an important, overlooked detail, Margaret's eyes widen as she abruptly interrupts the tense political discussion. She quickly informs Aletta that an incredibly worried senior Brandon personally visited their classroom after noticing her prolonged absence from training. Hearing her overprotective childhood friend's name, Aletta mutters Frio's name with a complicated mixture of immense guilt and looming dread. Surprising Margaret with a sudden outburst, Aletta abruptly decides to go do some intense physical training. Aletta sincerely hopes that forcefully moving her body will make her unpleasant thoughts completely disappear. Margaret warmly agrees with the sentiment but strictly warns the energetic girl not to overdo it. Despite a massive pile of lingering problems, Aletta firmly resolves to push her frustrations aside. Striding forward with absolute purpose, Aletta declares that times of crisis require immediate physical action. Bursting onto the training grounds, an excited Aletta eagerly claims the vast space for herself. Panicking at her sudden arrival, a terrified student urgently orders another to fetch the instructor immediately. Aletta fiercely prepares for the intense session as the heavy legacy of the Bergheit family looms. Far southeast of the Wynwood Kingdom's royal capital lies a treacherous land surrounded by steep mountains. This dangerous, isolated terrain creates the perfect conditions for immensely powerful monsters to be born. Lacking the necessary strength, the nation previously suffered massive monster stampedes that occupied the land. Shattering the despair, a mysteriously powerful mercenary suddenly appeared and completely transformed the hopeless battlefield. Wielding unimaginable might, the lone man's terrifying strength far exceeded the boundaries of human common sense. Charging fearlessly into the absolute chaos, the legendary warrior unleashed his overwhelming physical power. Striking with explosive, earth-shattering force, he single-handedly subdued the entire savage army of towering monsters. Praised for his miraculous achievement, the king granted him noble status to guard the deadly forest. This legendary hero became the first Viscount Bergheitz and stands as Aletta's direct, incredibly powerful ancestor. Frantic instructors desperately scramble to minimize facility damage while nervously monitoring the living legend's descendant. The Bergheitz hold immense kingdom-wide importance because their absence would allow monsters to flood the nation. Honoring their sacred lineage, the direct descendant possessing the strongest blood becomes the ruling family head. Passing this extraordinary, monstrous bloodline to the next generation remains their absolute and sacred duty. Even centuries later, only the incredibly powerful Bergheitz possess the strength to fight monsters barehanded. Terrified students wildly gossip about Aletta's rumored superhuman strength as she completely pulverizes the training targets. Brushing off their shocked whispers, Aletta proudly declares she will eventually succeed her father as the head. Releasing a ferocious battle cry, Aletta violently unleashes a massive shockwave that obliterates the surrounding area. Panicked instructors yell about evacuated students as Aletta desperately struggles to suppress her surging, explosive power. Piercing through the chaotic destruction, a familiar, urgent voice suddenly screams Aletta's name in sheer panic. Frio bravely intercepts her destructive path, aggressively warning that she will completely destroy the entire building. Gasping for breath, a deeply relieved Aletta sincerely thanks Frio for halting her out-of-control rampage. Bowing her head in genuine shame, a sheepish Aletta quickly apologizes for causing such a massive disaster. Sighing heavily, Frio gently scolds her for foolishly training while entirely distracted by her lingering thoughts. Exasperated but clearly relieved, Frio stares down at the incredibly dense girl standing safely before him. Staring up at his serious face, Aletta realizes with genuine surprise that Frio is deeply worried. Smiling warmly, Aletta privately reflects that a caring, protective childhood friend will surely make a wonderful husband. Wishing him true happiness, she bitterly compares his kindness to her own incomprehensible and sudden romantic rejection. Blushing furiously, a highly flustered Frio quietly accepts her apology and insists that everything is fine. Regaining his serious composure, Frio urgently suggests changing locations to discuss an incredibly important matter privately. Staring intently at his childhood friend, Frio asks if Aletta has finished drafting the crucial incident report. Sweating nervously, an awkward Aletta averts her gaze and sheepishly admits the letter remains completely unwritten. Laughing awkwardly at her dismal academic record, Aletta mentally cries over her desperate need for remedial classes. Aletta stares confusedly at Frio's unusually serious face, questioning his sudden tense demeanor. Frio bluntly halts her actions, firmly ordering her not to write the incident report to her father just yet. He grimly reveals that the fierce Berg Heights Territory Army, who escorted them from training, already knows about the chaotic royal situation. Boiling with protective rage, the loyal soldiers were absolutely furious that their future family head was publicly made a fool of. Frio warns with deadly seriousness that her fearsome father will never stay silent once he hears their fiery, impassioned report. Aletta gasps in sheer terror, realizing with dread that her highly destructive older brother might actually march on the capital. Staring intensely at his shocked friend, Frio confirms the immense, kingdom-shaking gravity of the political disaster currently unfolding. Since the massive wheels of fate are already turning, Frio firmly advises Aletta to brace herself for the incoming storm. Panic completely shatters Aletta's composure as she wildly flails her arms, screaming about what exactly she must prepare for. Her overloaded mind completely breaks down upon realizing she possesses absolutely zero power to stop the impending diplomatic catastrophe. Choosing absolute denial, a cheerfully disassociated Aletta aggressively stuffs her face with delicious food to completely ignore reality. The elegant Lady Madeline suddenly approaches the bustling table, offering a perfectly graceful greeting to the delightfully distracted girl. Expressing deep, genuine concern, the beautiful noblewoman softly asks if Aletta is truly recovering from the horrifying royal ordeal. Blushing heavily under her beloved mentor's intense gaze, Aletta stammers a quick reassurance that her physical body remains perfectly fine. Suffocating whispers and piercing stares from the surrounding academy students violently crash down upon their tense, highly public conversation. Unfazed by the massive crowd, Madeline calmly acknowledges the heavy surveillance and notes that such intrusive gossip cannot be helped. Apologizing for the sudden intrusion, the serious noblewoman firmly states she must urgently confirm one highly crucial political detail. Leaning in closely, Madeline demands to know exactly how the fearsome Berg Heights family intends to respond to the massive public insult. Aletta nervously hesitates, sweating profusely as she desperately struggles to form a coherent answer for the demanding older girl. Gulping heavily, Aletta nervously admits that her overzealous territory soldiers already reported the disastrous incident ahead of schedule. Aletta reveals the initial, terrifying rumor that one of her highly destructive brothers might personally storm the royal capital. Before she can finish her thought, a panicked Professor Lawrence Cadogan violently interrupts the conversation with a horrified, echoing scream. The 24-year-old teacher route capture target stares at Aletta in pure, unadulterated terror as the apocalyptic news finally sinks in. Aletta inwardly notes his absence from the condemnation party, realizing the game's heroine entirely failed to capture his heart. The terrified professor physically recoils and violently sweats as dark, traumatic memories seemingly flood his panicked, rapidly racing mind. Aletta mentally recalls that this pathetic, trembling man is actually a former classmate of her notoriously destructive second brother, Bernard. Shaking with absolute dread, Lawrence remembers how the walking troublemaker Bernard once half-destroyed a school building and forcefully befriended him. Taking deep pity on the deeply traumatized teacher, Aletta quickly waves her hands and reassures him her explosive brother isn't coming. Gasping in immense relief, Lawrence vigorously agrees that the powerful direct Berg Heights line must absolutely remain home to protect the nation. Madeline astutely observes that even a single Berg Heights member leaving their territory drastically reduces the kingdom's vital combat strength. She coldly notes that abandoning their vital post for petty revenge would basically unleash a devastating monster flood upon the unprotected kingdom. Nodding in solemn agreement, Madeline firmly deduces the pragmatic Bergheit's family surely considered those terrifying, nation-ending political implications. Aletta quickly adds that stirring up further political unrest with the disgraced prince would hardly benefit the kingdom's innocent people. Regaining his professional composure, a deeply relieved Lawrence safely assumes a simple retainer will be dispatched to handle the diplomatic mess. Preparing to violently shatter his fragile peace, Aletta brightly announces that her fearsome father is actually coming to the capital instead. A deafening, horrified silence instantly crushes the stunned trio as the terrifying reality of the monster-slaying family head's arrival finally sinks in. Utterly broken by the catastrophic news, Professor Lawrence screams in sheer terror while a stunned Madeline stammers in complete, overwhelming disbelief. Aletta mentally resigns herself to the impending chaos, noting her father's aggressive intent to violently question the royal family and House Northrat. Staring blankly into empty space, Aletta seriously reflects on the two major reasons she completely failed to realize this world was an Otome game. She grimly attributes her profound, world-altering ignorance entirely to the massive, bloody existence of monster stampedes and her brutal territory army. Screaming their battle cries, the fierce soldiers of Bergheitz charge forward with explosive energy. Aletta observes the smiling troops clashing with monsters, realizing this apocalyptic sight was her everyday reality. The chaotic monster stampede rages violently across the devastated battlefield. Vicious strikes slice through the air as the troops relentlessly crush the monstrous threat. Onlookers tremble in shock, paralyzed by the sheer intensity of the unfolding slaughter. A suffocating, overwhelming pressure suddenly descends and crushes the breath from everyone present. August Bergheitz arrives, instantly dominating the entire atmosphere with his terrifying aura. Panicked soldiers wonder if they will be killed, though Aletta knows the Viscount is no murderer. The terrified bystanders openly question if this monstrous force of nature is even human. Heavy footsteps thunder as the imposing leader marches directly toward the crowd. A primal instinct warns everyone that something extraordinarily dangerous approaches. The overwhelming menace finally reaches the front lines, freezing the onlookers in their tracks. "Father!" Aletta cries out, breaking the heavy tension with her familiar voice. August coldly acknowledges Aletta, thanking her for the reception. Sweating nervously, Aletta greets him while mentally screaming that her life resembles a war conquest rather than a romance game. August immediately commands preparations for a confrontation at the Marquis Northrat residence tomorrow regarding her fiancé. He glares ominously, demanding that every detail is executed properly. Aletta realizes the severity of the situation as her father's subordinates frantically scramble to obey. He is completely furious, Aletta thinks, feeling the immense gravity of his silent wrath. An oppressive, dark aura violently radiates from August's massive frame. An unfortunate passerby freezes as they accidentally wander into the terrifying domain. Terrified subordinates quickly shout their compliance and prepare to march. The imposing retinue moves out, radiating an unstoppable and dangerous intent. Fearing for the royal capital, Aletta desperately prays that there will be no more innocent victims. Arriving at Marquis Northrat's estate, the trembling host stammers a fearful welcome to Lord Bergheitz. August merely grunts a dismissive sound, radiating absolute disdain. Total chaos erupts as the Marquis's wife collapses under the sheer weight of August's crushing presence. Aletta watches innocent people fall victim to her father's relentless aura, wondering why she is the one feeling guilty. She questions her own guilt since they only came to demand an explanation from Lord Lewis. The terrified servants finally announce that they have brought Lord Lewis to face judgment. "Let him in," the command rings out, sealing the young man's fate. The heavy wooden doors slowly creak open to reveal the impending disaster. Aletta stares in complete shock at the unrecognizable, battered pulp of a man dragged into the room. The broken figure groans weakly, struggling just to remain conscious. August dryly notes that there isn't even a spot left on the boy's body for him to hit. Horrified, Aletta realizes her father actually planned to beat Lewis to death, demanding to know what happened. The Marquis flinches violently, caught in the terrifying crosshairs of the Bergheit's wrath. Nervous laughter escapes the Marquis as he admits their own knight commander brutally trained Lewis as a self-imposed penalty. Unmoved by the bloody display, August coldly declares that he will break the engagement because Lewis neglected his daughter. The Marquis desperately begs for another chance to talk sense into his son, but the broken engagement stands firm. Trembling violently on the cold floor, the severely battered Lewis cowers under the intense scrutiny of his judges. Glaring down mercilessly, August bluntly notes that the broken boy completely lacks the will to continue fighting. Louis shudders violently in silence under the oppressive, terrifying gaze of the Bergheit's patriarch. Observing Louis's stubborn silence, Aletta silently admits he possesses more guts than expected out of his sheer love for Lady Rain. Remembering how she almost married this man, Aletta realizes they were simply never meant to be together. With their engagement officially dissolved, Louis and Aletta fail to exchange a single word during the entire tense discussion. The very next day, a somber Lady Madeline suddenly announces that her own engagement to Lord Sylvain will soon be dissolved. Shocked by this unexpected revelation, Aletta stares wide-eyed at Lady Madeline's perfectly composed face. Processing the heavy news, Aletta mentally notes that Lord Sylvain is naturally one of the game's primary capture targets. To her absolute horror, Aletta suddenly realizes that Lady Madeline was actually the designated villainess of Sylvain's specific route. Remembering Madeline's incredibly kind and caring nature, Aletta completely failed to recognize her true antagonist role in the game. Maintaining her fierce aristocratic pride, Madeline firmly declares she was always prepared to marry any man with a smile. Her expression darkens drastically as she aggressively curses how foolish Sylvain became after meeting the heroine, Lisa Ruggia. Utterly disgusted by her former fiancé, Madeline coldly admits that just looking at his face now physically sickens her. Hearing the harsh word, sick, Aletta enthusiastically agrees that breaking off the engagement is the absolute best outcome despite Sylvain's handsome looks. Intensely curious about the shifting future, Aletta openly wonders who Lady Madeline's next fiancé could possibly be. Prince Alan is immediately crossed off the list of royal candidates due to his impending, humiliating exile. The promising sons of other high-ranking nobles are also fully disqualified since the greedy heroine has already preyed upon them. Gazing in awe at Madeline's overwhelming beauty, Aletta seriously doubts there is a single man left in the capital truly worthy of her. Later that day, Frio suddenly calls out to Aletta, completely shattering her deep train of thought. Munching happily on delicious fries, Aletta quickly asks Frio if he genuinely wants some of the food she is treating him to. Unbothered by the simple, inexpensive meal, Frio casually accepts her friendly culinary offer. Walking comfortably side by side, the two close friends head directly into the bustling heart of the castle town. Realizing it has been a long while since they hung out, Aletta hesitates nervously before finally addressing Frio. She directly asks Frio if he heard the chaotic news about her political engagement breaking off yesterday. Sighing softly with a knowing look, Frio confidently admits that he had already figured the whole situation out. Shrugging off any lingering concern, Aletta quickly assures him she is not depressed and is actually incredibly glad the ordeal is finally over. She practically explains that staying engaged politically would have been painfully awkward after everything that rapidly transpired. Recalling the incredibly tense meeting, Aletta eagerly prepares to tell Frio all about Lord Louis's bizarrely avoidant behavior. She aggressively complains that Louis found talking to her so agonizing he stubbornly refused to even look her in the eye. Wondering aloud in genuine confusion, Aletta loudly questions if she really did something awful enough to be hated that intensely. Frio immediately bursts into laughter, accurately guessing Louis was already beaten to an unrecognizable pulp at the Marquis's house. Aletta openly admits that seeing her former fiancé beaten so severely completely erased her anger and instantly replaced it with pure pity. Frio thoughtfully notes that allowing Louis to take a brutal beating was undeniably the Marquis's smartest move to appease the terrifying Bergheit's family. He cleverly points out that Aletta's fiercely intimidating father is definitely not the type to lay a hand on a man who is already severely injured. Nodding firmly in agreement, Aletta abruptly shifts the topic and sharply asks if Prince Alan is truly being formally disinherited. Frio confidently confirms the dark rumor, explicitly stating the king isn't foolish enough to keep a crown prince who actively frames others. Astonished by the sheer, destructive foolishness of love, Aletta absolutely cannot fathom how royals or nobles could blindly choose personal feelings over their sworn duty. Staring thoughtfully into the distance, she firmly declares she could never truly understand that kind of blinding, irrational romantic feeling. Frio watches her quietly with a gentle gaze and softly remarks that she is perfectly fine just the way she currently is. Frio poses a rhetorical question, imagining the catastrophic collapse of the nation if the Bergheits abandoned their defensive posts to elope. The country would utterly vanish in an instant without their indomitable protection. Frio affirms this harsh reality, validating Aletta's proud lineage as a true Bergheit's. Aletta encourages Frio to trust his own sound judgment because he would never make a choice that ruins the kingdom. Snapping back to the present, Aletta notes how their town outing started heavy but quickly shifted. Shaking off the gloom, Frio urges Aletta to cheer up and keep eating as they head to their next stop. Aletta insists on throwing away her own trash to show independence. Frio gently takes it from her instead, teasingly calling her a dummy for trying to do it herself. Flustered and blushing, Aletta stammers after Frio as he cheerfully walks ahead. Aletta mutters a quick complaint under her breath while chasing after him. She watches him closely, quietly remarking to herself just how overprotective he can be. Shifting scenes across the realm, the story cuts to the capital of the Aduvina kingdom. Prince Leon Winwood exchanges polite greetings, eagerly looking forward to a successful partnership. Leon confidently assures his associates that he will personally handle all matters regarding the business alliance. A messenger approaches Prince Leon, declaring he has arrived at the absolute right moment. The messenger hands over an exclusive catalog for a new vintage wine, noting it is a masterpiece meant for him. Spotting a familiar insignia on the document, Leon immediately tells them to place an order. Unfolding the urgent message, he reads the chilling emergency code demanding his immediate return home. Shocked wide-eyed, Leon stammers in sheer disbelief at the sudden crisis. Panic sets in as he frantically wonders what catastrophic disaster has struck his homeland. Clenching his fists in terror, he desperately prays for the safety of his brother. Far away in the Adivinian territory, a courier delivers a sealed letter from Lady Oriana to Aletta's direct unit. Urged by her comrades, Aletta eagerly reaches out to read the letter sent straight from her mother. Aletta reflects on her mother, Oriana Bergheitz, who possesses timeless beauty masking her terrifying demon-like temper. Shivering at the thought, Aletta nervously wonders if the letter contains a brutal written lecture. The letter opens with a casual greeting from Oriana, breaking the heavy suspense. Oriana writes to give her a heads-up before the royal family makes an official public announcement. The shocking news reveals that Gregory's engagement to the Duke Albarraso's daughter has been officially decided. Aletta gasps in utter confusion, recalling that Frio mentioned her close friendship with Lady Madeline. The text highlights Gregory Bergheitz, Aletta's stubborn fourth older brother. Aletta's mind races as she tries to process her brother being tied to that specific name. The sudden revelation that Madeline is the bride sends her thoughts spinning into total chaos. Aletta shrieks in absolute disbelief, completely overwhelmed by the absurd pairing. She frantically questions when on earth an engagement between Gregory and Lady Madeline could have possibly started. Staring blankly at the page, she tries to trace back the timeline of this insane development. Lady Madeline maintains a calm composure, dismissing the chaos with a casual shrug. Madeline tells Aletta to calm down, admitting even she finds the sudden turn of events rather dizzying. She explains that her father had actually been approached about the union for quite some time. The arrangement quietly moved forward behind the scenes right as the recent massive incident occurred. Madeline finishes by wondering if this wildly convenient twist of fate should simply be called pure good luck. The strategic discussion smoothly resolves the surrounding political issues, cementing the newly established engagement. The central nobility and royal family express profound gratitude for the Duke's brilliant, problem-solving foresight. A companion tentatively addresses Lady Madeline, noticing her shifting, enthusiastic demeanor. Beaming with undeniable joy, Madeline confirms her ecstatic mood to her curious peers. She radiates immense pride as she confidently prepares to reveal her grand strategy. Boasting of her elite royal bloodline, she credits her grandmother, a former princess from the ducal house of Albarraso. She highlights the monumental strategic advantage of the marital alliance now forged with the formidable House Bergheitz. Madeline declares this brilliant maneuver perfectly leverages her immense value to halt the royal family's impending decline. Her peers eagerly praise the union as infinitely superior to a disastrous marriage into House Sanieri. Pausing dramatically, Madeline hints at a far darker underlying political motive. She exposes a treacherous plot by unseen forces aiming to crush the royal family by dragging House Bergheitz into an internal rebellion. Springing into action, a crucial item is decisively handed over to turn the tides of the looming conflict. The mysterious object passes between hands in a heavy, suspenseful silence. A stern, unwavering instruction echoes to use the gifted tool wisely. Swearing fiercely upon the name of Albarraso, Madeline vows to crush any foolish internal rebellion before it starts. Shocked by the sudden realization, Aletta realizes she is about to become Madeline's official sister-in-law. The gears turn rapidly in Aletta's mind as she connects the impending high-profile marriage to her own brother. Madeline warmly and enthusiastically embraces the prospect of becoming Aletta's new older sister. Blushing with nervous excitement, Aletta bashfully admits she would love having Madeline join her family. The very next week, Madeline confidently sets off for Berg Heights to formally meet her powerful new in-laws. Aletta's friends excitedly rally around her, wishing for the monumental engagement proceedings to go smoothly. Releasing a heavy, exhausted sigh, Aletta visibly deflates in the middle of the lively academy hallway. Noticing the sudden gloom, her friend questions what shattered Aletta's previously cheerful mood. Aletta stammers hesitantly, struggling to voice her bubbling internal frustrations. Seeking comfort in food, she loudly complains that Frio's unusually intense attention has become incredibly annoying. Her friend gently suggests Frio is merely protecting her after the recent string of chaotic events. Sensing deeper tension, her companion presses to uncover if something specific triggered her growing annoyance. Aletta deflects by explaining her frustrating position as the diminutive youngest of 5 siblings. She grumbles about her massive, overprotective father and brothers, suspecting they coddle her simply because she is the first Berg Heights daughter born in centuries. Frustrated by their smothering affection, she affectionately brands her burly family members as absolute sister idiots. Bursting with fierce pride, Aletta declares she is the powerful future head of House Berg Heights who protects them, not the other way around. She laments that Frio must still view her as a child, revealing he surprisingly held her hand during a recent outing. Furious at the perceived slight, she reminds everyone that she is physically stronger than the allegedly protective Frio. Her friend stops dead in her tracks, completely shocked to realize Aletta went out entirely alone with Lord Frio Brandon. Aletta tries to downplay the encounter, noting they rarely go out anymore despite him always assisting with her combat training. With a knowing smirk, her friend highlights the crucial, undeniable detail that Frio deliberately initiated the invitation. Aletta stares blankly, utterly confused by her friend's sudden, incredibly suspicious grin. Shattering Aletta's naive illusions, her friend points out that a grown man holding a woman's hand is absolutely not treating her like a child. The friend triumphantly declares their solitary, hand-holding outing was undeniably a romantic date. Dropping the final bombshell, her friend concludes that Frio is constantly worried because he genuinely harbors romantic feelings for Aletta. Margaret confidently supports the relationship, suspecting Frio's devotion stems from more than just deep admiration for the Berg Heights family. Aletta wildly flails in shock, utterly bewildered by Margaret's sudden, scandalous implications. Struck by a harsh revelation, Aletta desperately questions why she had remained blindly convinced of her naive assumptions. The undeniable truth finally crashes down on her as she fully realizes she and Frio share no actual sibling bond. She mentally scrambles, admitting she had simply always viewed him as a comforting older brother figure. Reviewing his background as an 18-year-old childhood friend from a neighboring earl's house, she accepts they are completely unrelated by blood. Aletta visualizes the blatant reality of an unrelated, of-age man and woman publicly strolling hand in hand. She nervously concedes that any outside observer would naturally misunderstand their overly affectionate dynamic. Gripped by deep embarrassment, she harshly brands the entire mortifying hand-holding incident as a colossal blunder. Heavy realization sets in as Aletta solemnly accepts the awkward truth of her rapidly changing situation. She angrily shifts the blame, certain the oblivious Frio still ignorantly treats her like a literal little sister. Groaning in intense frustration, Aletta physically recoils from the overwhelming mental stress. She silently stews in her chaotic thoughts, desperately trying to process the massive shift in their childhood dynamic. Panic bubbles up as she agonizes over exactly how she is supposed to casually interact with her closest friend moving forward. She laments her vulnerable isolation in the massive royal capital, stationed so terribly far away from her familiar homeland. Aletta reminisces fondly about Frio, heavily valuing him as the one rare person she could truly interact with as an equal. Frio's familiar voice suddenly pierces the air, sharply calling out Aletta's name. He aggressively shouts again, demanding the immediate attention of the startled girl. Spotting Frio's approaching face, a panicked Aletta instantly turns her back and sprints away. Frio loudly complains that her instant, evasive flight upon seeing him is incredibly cruel. Aletta mentally curses her terrible luck, wondering why she had to bump into Frio at this exact, awkward moment. Still giving chase, an annoyed Frio forcefully orders Aletta to stop running and wait. He yells out once more, desperately trying to close the widening distance between them. Pushing through the noisy crowd, Frio demands to know if Aletta is even listening to his desperate pleas. Realizing she is drawing far too much public attention, Aletta decides she has no choice but to take drastic action. Frio gasps in sheer shock as Aletta suddenly shifts her stance to rapidly accelerate. She blasts forward with incredible physical prowess, effortlessly leaving the bewildered Frio completely in the dust. Dashing through the winding streets, she silently apologizes to Frio while resolving to lose him entirely. Frio hopelessly screams Aletta's name as her swift figure completely vanishes from his sight. Finally reaching a secluded spot, Aletta exhales a deep breath of relief, believing she successfully escaped. She pauses in the quiet solitude to gather her scattered thoughts and calm her rapidly racing heart. Margaret's earth-shattering claim that her childhood outing was a romantic date violently echoes in Aletta's overwhelmed mind. Aletta confesses that Margaret's blunt words permanently shattered her innocent perspective, forcing her to finally see Frio as a man. Paralyzed by newfound awkwardness, she admits she completely forgot how to act naturally around her closest companion. Aletta suddenly freezes, her sharp eyes catching sight of something hidden deep in the quiet shadows. Spotting a couple engaged in a secret romantic meeting, a highly uncomfortable Aletta immediately decides to avert her gaze. Cursing her terrible luck, she swiftly turns to leave but abruptly realizes the man involved is Lord Lewis. Aletta stares in stunned silence as she accidentally eavesdrops on the incredibly tense, private confrontation. Lewis solemnly addresses his companion, taking full blame and admitting he should have anticipated the disastrous consequences of holding her hand in public. Plagued by deep regret, Lewis forcefully claims his thoughtless actions made his companion nothing more than an innocent victim. Aletta mentally screams in pure shock, completely flabbergasted by the deeply dramatic, secret scene unfolding right before her hidden eyes. Lewis solemnly apologizes to Rain, confessing that his desperate desire to protect her from exile ultimately worsened their grim situation. Gripped by intense, crushing guilt, Lewis bows his head and firmly insists he is the sole person who truly deserves the blame. Rain stares at his offered hand, softly admitting she genuinely did not care about her own fate in that fleeting, desperate moment. She guiltily brings up Aletta's sudden collapse, agonizing over how she can possibly apologize to the wronged noblewoman. Lewis coldly brushes off her deep concern, bluntly assuring Rain that his official fiancé will be perfectly fine regardless. He coldly dismisses his relationship with Aletta, strictly categorizing it as a purely political engagement devoid of any true affection. Lewis explains he was fully prepared to faithfully fulfill his noble duty and serve House Bergheitz with all his heart once finalized. A dark, terrifying memory abruptly surfaces as Lewis vividly recalls the chilling day of his very first official meeting with Aletta. He recounts the horrifying sight of his new fiancée mercilessly slaughtering monsters while laughing, completely drenched in fresh blood. Trembling slightly at the visceral memory, Lewis openly confesses his deep, lingering terror toward the overwhelmingly powerful Aletta. He bitterly assumes that such a formidable, bloodthirsty warrior must have secretly wanted to reject a weak, powerless partner like himself. Eavesdropping from the shadows, Aletta completely freezes in shock upon hearing Lewis's brutal, painfully unfiltered confession. Her mind races back through time as she frantically reflects on the exact details of that fateful, bloody first meeting. She vividly remembers the vibrant spring from exactly 2 years ago when she was just a naive, 14-year-old girl. Her boisterous father enthusiastically celebrated her new engagement, proudly envisioning her splendidly ruling their harsh domain alongside her new partner. Both her father and brother loudly encouraged her to impress her future husband by showcasing her brave, monster-slaying prowess during an active overflow. Eager to please her loving family, young Aletta enthusiastically agreed to display her best side by viciously slaughtering as many beasts as possible. She mentally justifies her violent actions, noting that in the brutal, eternal battlefield of Bergheitz, true combat strength is highly prized in a partner. Aletta remembers earnestly attempting to appeal to her new fiancé in her own uniquely violent, battle-hardened way to win his affection. A vivid flashback reveals the young, enthusiastic Aletta formally introducing herself to a deeply terrified, wide-eyed Lord Lewis. She stands remarkably tall and proud amidst the carnage, firmly announcing her prestigious noble identity to her newly decided partner. With fierce, unwavering confidence, she formally declares herself as Aletta Bergheitz, the formidable woman appointed as his new fiancée. Flashing a bright, innocent smile while completely soaked in monster gore, She cheerfully announces she looks forward to working closely together. Snapping violently back to the present, Aletta furiously cringes, aggressively berating her incredibly clueless past self for the terrifying display. She heavily sighs in defeat, realizing she had completely and seamlessly adapted to a world vastly different from her previous life. Having fully embraced the simple, brutal logic that might makes right, she had unknowingly blended perfectly into her harsh new reality. However, experiencing the highly refined, delicate culture of the royal capital finally forces her to painfully recognize her glaring social missteps. Aletta agonizingly accepts that her combat-obsessed, violent sensibilities are strictly only acceptable back home in the rugged Bergheit's territory. She gloomily concedes that it was entirely natural, and completely expected, for Louis to be utterly repulsed by her blood-soaked introduction. Suddenly, a familiar voice violently yanks her from her spiraling thoughts as Frio softly calls out to her from the nearby shadows. Startled by Frio's stealthy arrival, Aletta sharply turns her head, completely caught off guard by his sudden, close proximity. Back in the dramatic scene, Louis drops a massive bombshell, revealing his imminent, forced assignment to the brutal Bergheit's territorial army. He solemnly tells Rain that he is fully prepared for his grim fate, absolutely certain he will never be able to see her beautiful face again. Heavy tears immediately stream down Rain's face as she devastatingly rejects the heartbreaking reality of his impending, permanent departure. Louis gently holds her close, passionately declaring his profound, eternal love for Lady Rain from the very bottom of his broken heart. He offers a sad, tender smile, expressing immense gratitude for the painfully fleeting moments of genuine connection they managed to share. Turning away to accept his harsh punishment, Louis tearfully apologizes for failing to protect her, begging her to find future happiness without him. Desperate and completely heartbroken, Rain frantically begs Lord Louis to wait, utterly refusing to let him walk away from her forever. Watching the deeply tear-jerking climax unfold, an utterly bewildered Aletta turns to Frio, questioning if they are watching a theatrical play instead of reality. Reflecting on the brutal reality of her homeland, Aletta muses that people sent to Bergheit's are relentlessly trained into unyielding survivors, contrary to Louis treating it like a death sentence. She dreads the sheer awkwardness of her ex-fiancé arriving at her estate but begrudgingly accepts that Lady Oriana's final decision cannot be overturned. Acknowledging their chronic military shortage, Aletta firmly resolves to handle the uncomfortable situation as the responsible future head of her house. Chuckling at her own pampered complaints, she quickly regains her composure and fiercely embraces her demanding leadership duties. Shifting the conversation suddenly, Aletta confidently announces that she finally uncovered the exact reason behind her abrupt rejection. She bluntly reveals that her terrifying, blood-drenched appearance during their very first meeting completely horrified the faint-hearted lord. Frio instantly scoffs at Louis's cowardly reaction, heavily criticizing the nobleman for lacking the basic guts required of a true knight. Sighing softly, Aletta dismisses the failed engagement as a massive, unbridgeable clash in their fundamental cultural values. She calmly accepts the inevitable fallout, rationally noting that a delicate woman like Lady Rain perfectly matches Lord Louis's fragile preferences. Bursting with immense pride, Aletta powerfully declares that the unmatched strength of Bergheit's is their defining, glorious trait. She smiles warmly, her confident demeanor fully restored by her unshakable belief in her family's formidable legacy. Noticing a sudden shift in the atmosphere, a slightly confused Aletta gently asks Frio why he is staring at her so intently. Staring directly into her eyes, Frio dramatically shatters the casual tension by bluntly asking Aletta to marry him. Aletta stammers in utter disbelief as Frio fiercely declares his deep love for her rugged, Bergheit's-like spirit. Frio sheepishly admits he was heavily ordered by Lady Oriana to keep his long-standing, secret intentions completely hidden from her. Shocking Aletta to her absolute core, he confesses that his constant childhood presence was entirely because he was originally a top candidate to become her fiancé. His expression darkens slightly as he recalls the bitter memory of his carefully laid plans being suddenly derailed. He bitterly explains that the Northrat family ruthlessly snatched her away at the last second by exploiting their powerful central nobility connections. Furious at the past injustice, Frio aggressively rants about losing her to a useless noble who completely ignored Bergheit's to dote on the royal faction. He softly concludes his frustrated rant, admitting that these intensely bitter feelings have secretly haunted him for years. Aletta stares at him in breathless awe, slowly processing the overwhelming magnitude of his hidden childhood devotion. Suspicion suddenly flares in Aletta's mind as she bluntly asks if Frio used his notorious behind-the-scenes skills to directly sabotage Louis's engagement. Frio swiftly denies the accusation, genuinely swearing that the recent chaotic fallout with Louis was an entirely unexpected development. He earnestly explains that he would never sabotage a crucial political alliance that Aletta had seemingly been so happy to fulfill. Looking at her with deeply affectionate eyes, he firmly states he would never orchestrate something that would ultimately cause her pain. Deeply moved by his profound, selfless care, Aletta softly murmurs his name as her heart swells with genuine warmth. Flashing a determined smirk, Frio smoothly admits he never fully gave up on her and continued making backup plans just in case. He reveals his masterful foresight, explaining that his secret groundwork perfectly enabled Gregory's sudden, highly advantageous engagement to Duchess Albarasso. Astounded by his political genius, Aletta loudly gasps as she realizes Frio single-handedly orchestrated her brother's powerful marital alliance. Frio humbly scratches his cheek, casually confirming his massive, behind-the-scenes role in securing the Bergheit's family's political future. Aletta's mind floods with nostalgic memories, completely recontextualizing the young boy who practically lived at her family's rugged estate. She vividly remembers him pushing himself to the absolute limit during brutal training sessions just to prove his utmost worth to her formidable family. She guiltily admits she had completely misread his desperate efforts, blindly assuming he was just a fanatical Bergheit's devotee like his eccentric father. The crushing weight of his silent, lifelong dedication finally hits her as she realizes every single thing he did was entirely for her sake. Heartbroken by her own past ignorance, she painfully agonizes over how devastated Frio must have secretly felt when her political engagement violently ruined his years of hard work. Overcome with profound respect and affection, Aletta tearfully concludes that Frio is an incredibly good, unparalleled man. Unfazed by her emotional epiphany, Frio casually drops another massive bombshell by revealing he formally applied for her hand in marriage just yesterday. Violently yanked from her touching inner monologue, Aletta shrieks in utter, wide-eyed bewilderment at his incredibly rapid pacing. Frio intensely vows that he absolutely refuses to lose her this time, confirming her father is already positively considering his bold proposal. Leaning in with an undeniable, burning resolve, he demands that Aletta finally look at him seriously as a formidable candidate for her heart. Frio locks eyes with the stunned warrior, boldly declaring his lifelong love to ensure she finally understands his heart. Flustered by the sudden confession, Aletta stammers in disbelief while Frio gently urges her to simply think about his words. Her mind races with combat tactics, struggling to reconcile her desire to defeat him in training with his unexpected romantic advance. Aletta spirals into total confusion over the prospect of an engagement, completely missing Frio's genuinely concerned apology. The heavy weight of his earnest plea crushes her thoughts as he begs her to deeply consider their potential union. Overwhelmed by the emotional overload, Aletta's battle-hardened brain completely short-circuits under the intense romantic pressure. Clutching her head in pure agony, she hilariously admits her absolute inability to process multiple complex thoughts at once. Desperate to escape the crushing awkwardness of reality, Aletta violently pivots and decides to go train instead. A stark flashback reveals a 4-year-old Aletta boasting monstrous physical strength, heavily contrasting the frail but highly intelligent 6-year-old Frio. Frio's eccentric father furiously stutters his son's name, prompting the young boy to calmly ask if a crisis struck the Bergheit's territory. Maintaining a hilariously deadpan demeanor, young Frio casually orders his aggressively vibrating father to calm down. The narration exposes the father's clever ruse of spending half the month at Bergheit's under the fake pretense of fighting monster stampedes. Driven by fanatical devotion, the overly passionate patriarch wildly hero worships the previous head of the Bergheit's family. Bursting with immense pride, the frantic nobleman announces miraculous news regarding Lord August Bergheit's formidable daughter. He ecstatically reveals that Frio has miraculously been chosen as a prime engagement candidate for the future family head. Before the utterly bewildered Frio can even process the shock, his father ruthlessly drags him toward the Bergheit's estate. Frio internally marvels at the legendary Bergheit's bloodline, recognizing their monstrous power as a truly one-of-a-kind existence. Staring blankly ahead, he admits he fully expected to be drafted into their brutal army rather than securing a high-profile marriage proposal. Curiosity deeply grips him as he wonders what kind of extraordinary girl could usurp her 4 older brothers to become the heir. The rumbling carriage slowly approaches the intimidating estate while Frio continues to ponder the mysterious nature of his future partner. Stepping into the grand hall, Frio notes he is merely one of 3 nervous boys selected for this intense engagement trial. A majestic woman gently instructs her daughter to step forward and properly greet the young boys hoping to become her friends. Beaming with radiant innocence, the young Aletta cheerfully agrees to her mother's polite request. Frio stares in utter bewilderment as the supposed warrior heir introduces herself as a seemingly perfect, completely ordinary girl. Doubting her legendary status, Frio watches her eagerly bounce forward to interrogate the terrified boys about their training routines. Radiating pure, unadulterated enthusiasm, Aletta cheerfully announces her recent, intense obsession with performing heavy squats. She playfully slaps Frio's fragile shoulder, instantly and violently shattering his bone upon impact. Panic erupts as her mother furiously scolds the destructive child and frantically calls for a healer to mend the broken boy. Aletta timidly apologizes for the brutal injury, innocently explaining that a bone-crushing slap is how she normally greets wild wyverns. Watching the other candidates flee in absolute terror, Aletta desperately begs the injured Frio not to fear her accidental strength. Heartbreak pools in her large eyes as she sadly asks if Frio is also too terrified to become her close friend. Frio suddenly realizes her deep, isolating loneliness stems from the direct line children being strictly confined until they hit the battlefield. He acknowledges the terrifying reality of her royal bloodline, a raw power famously capable of obliterating rocky mountains barehanded. Sweating profusely, the battered boy mentally concedes that her monstrous, uncontrollable strength is genuinely frightening. Calculating her restrained output, Frio boldly resolves that his advanced defensive magic could likely block her accidental, bone-shattering blows. Deciding that surviving her lethal friendship is vastly superior to the territorial army, Frio firmly accepts her lonely plea. From that fateful day onward, Frio dedicated half of every month to surviving the Bergheits estate as her loyal engagement candidate. Waving enthusiastically from the distance, a wildly cheerful Aletta loudly summons Frio to join her for a hearty snack time. Smelling the freshly grilled meat prepared by her legendary grandfather, Frio warmly admits he does not dislike the chaotic girl. Dashing eagerly toward her welcoming smile, the young boy blushes and secretly confesses that he actually really likes Aletta. Aletta bounds ahead through a shortcut, eagerly inviting Frio to hunt a monstrous beast in the backyard to build his stamina. Frio rapidly realizes that Aletta possesses far greater physical strength and resilience than he ever imagined. He marvels in awe at the astonishing, overwhelming power inherent to the legendary Bergheits bloodline. Shadowed by self-doubt, Frio slowly becomes discouraged by his own physical weakness and questions his worthiness as her fiancé. Time inevitably passes until one fateful, perspective-shifting day suddenly arrives. Frio nervously questions Lady Oriana's intentions as she silently leads him to an unfamiliar, hidden location. Aletta's imposing mother bluntly reveals they have entered a restricted training ground completely exclusive to the direct Bergheits bloodline. Swallowing his fear, Frio quietly admits that Lady Oriana's intense, unyielding presence always makes him incredibly anxious. Inside the brutal arena, a towering instructor mercilessly commands a battered Aletta to stand back up on her feet. Frio watches in sheer horror as the relentless instructor brutally warns Aletta that her current weakness will swiftly cost her her life. The vicious assault continues without pause as Aletta desperately attempts to block a devastating, bone-crushing strike. Utterly exhausted and gasping for air, the young girl violently collapses onto the unforgiving stone floor. Unable to stomach the gruesome spectacle any longer, a terrified Frio desperately screams for the instructor to halt the beating. He frantically protests the relentless massacre, insisting that such lethal violence completely crosses the line of normal training. Trembling with sheer panic, Frio begs the adults to intervene before they outright slaughter the young Aletta. He desperately turns his panicked gaze toward Lady Oriana, pleading for her immediate, life-saving intervention. Looking down with a cold, completely unreadable expression, Oriana simply acknowledges his frantic outcry. She remains entirely unfazed, forcing Frio to watch helplessly as the horrific combat training continues entirely uninterrupted in the background. Oriana calmly delivers a shocking confession, bluntly declaring her deep, venomous hatred for their peaceful country. She bitterly resents the sheltered citizens who exploit Berghate's strength while blindly believing their monster-free peace is entirely natural. Revealing the heavy, inescapable burden of Aletta's immense inherited power, Oriana confirms her daughter is destined to lead their formidable family. Frio watches with a heavy, breaking heart, acutely aware that the legendary future head is still just a fragile little girl. Oriana explains that Aletta accepts this daily hellish torture as a completely natural, unavoidable requirement of her noble birth. She questions the sheer insanity of a child willingly embracing such horrific agony simply to protect ungrateful strangers. Oriana grimly attributes this unnatural, selfless dedication entirely to the cursed, warrior blood flowing through the Bergheit's family. She gestures sharply toward the battered child, mocking the foolish belief that Aletta's natural strength somehow prevents her from suffering. Staring intensely at Frio, Oriana promises that the entire country would easily perish if Bergheit's ever lost its formidable strength. She praises the direct bloodline's deep-seated, protective instinct that fiercely refuses to allow such a devastating collapse. Oriana explains that their unique bloodline rapidly evolves and reaches its peak potential only when pushed directly to the absolute brink of death. Bleeding but unbroken, a fiercely determined Aletta forces herself back onto her feet to continue her harrowing fight. Oriana strictly commands Frio to permanently memorize this brutal, unyielding reality of their endless warrior existence. She warns the frightened boy that demanding Aletta stop her training would completely deny her fundamental Bergheit's instincts. Oriana dismisses Frio's concern if he only wishes to be a casual friend, noting that denying her battle instincts essentially denies her very reason for living. However, she levels a piercing, challenging glare at Frio, deeply questioning his true intentions regarding a future with her daughter. She reveals the grim truth that the strongest warrior inevitably faces the most lethal front lines, a deadly role Aletta will soon inherit. Oriana strictly dictates that a true Bergheit spouse must independently discover how to keep their fighting leader alive on those deadly front lines. The sheer, crushing weight of Lady Oriana's haunting words permanently etches itself into young Frio's traumatized mind. Devastated by the sight of Aletta's countless injuries, Frio desperately searches his soul for any possible way to protect the girl he loves. He intensely reflects on his own heritage, noting the Brandon family's renowned mastery over highly specialized support magic. Gathering his inherited talents for defensive, barrier, and healing magic, Frio fiercely resolves to forge his own unique path to shield her. Frio intensely resolves to master barrier magic to defend the estate walls and defensive magic to perfectly shield Aletta on the battlefield. He passionately vows to harness elite healing magic to mend her wounds and powerful repair magic to instantly restore whatever gets destroyed. Burning with unwavering determination, Frio fiercely declares that he alone will become the ultimate support system for the battle-hardened Aletta. An older mentor warmly praises Frio, highly commending the young boy's absolutely remarkable magical and personal growth over the years. The mentor insists Frio's professional-level magic and advanced governance skills will make him an entirely indispensable asset to Bergheit's. Gently challenging the boy, the older man tells Frio to deeply reconsider the true nature of marriage because raw skills aren't everything. Frio completely freezes in utter shock as the man casually drops the bombshell that Aletta's official engagement has already been finalized. The mentor expresses profound surprise that Frio was completely unaware she is suddenly set to marry the second son of House Northrat. He explains his deep confusion over the sudden political announcement, having fully assumed Frio was the guaranteed choice for her fiancé. Furious on his student's behalf, the mentor vehemently declares he cannot remain silent if Frio did not willingly withdraw his candidacy. The older man urgently demands they march directly to his wife to forcefully uncover the hidden, treacherous truth behind this sudden betrayal. Frio firmly halts the angry man, solemnly refusing to escalate the devastating situation any further. Swallowing his immense pain, Frio bitterly accepts his tragic reality by admitting he was only ever just a temporary engagement candidate. He slowly resigns himself to Lady Oriana's final decision, suddenly remembering her past, ominous warnings about what a true marriage requires. Crushed by the agonizing weight of his own blindness, Frio severely curses himself for acting like an absolute, oblivious idiot. He agonizes over his catastrophic mistake, realizing far too late that simply working tirelessly to be a useful tool was never enough. Frio painfully grasps that the legendary House Bergheit's requires a spouse to be significantly more than just a highly capable subordinate. He understands the profound necessity of loving Aletta deeply as a woman so that they organically become each other's ultimate reason to live. He realizes the direct bloodline only manages to survive their lethal battles because they fiercely fight for the spouses they genuinely love. Completely devastated by the crushing revelation, Frio hopelessly concedes that he utterly failed to become Aletta's vital reason to live. Shifting to a tense confrontation, Lady Oriana bluntly explains that Prince Leon Winwood directly ordered the sudden marriage proposal with House Northrat. She heavily notes that the Bergheit's patriarchs were simply too busy slaughtering monsters to actively manage the corrupt nobles in the royal capital. Releasing an exhausted sigh, Oriana ruthlessly insults the pathetic royal family, coldly suggesting they might as well completely collapse without their support. She begrudgingly admits that strategically marrying Aletta off might somehow desperately smooth over the wildly deteriorating political situation. Oriana pierces Frio with a sharp, unforgiving glare, demanding he fully acknowledge that politics was not the sole reason he lost his candidacy. Bearing the agonizing weight of her brutal words, Frio softly bows his head and respectfully confirms he completely understands her true meaning. Oriana ruthlessly delivers the final, heart-shattering blow by stating Aletta only views him as a brother and could never easily fall in romantic love with him. Lady Oriana firmly acknowledges Frio's immense strength but insists Aletta desperately needs someone she can truly love to survive, prompting Frio's solemn, heartbreaking agreement. Humming a cheerful, carefree melody, an entirely unbothered Aletta lazily sprawls across her desk while completely ignoring her mounting political responsibilities. Spotting a neglected letter from Louis, an exasperated Frio sharply questions why Aletta refuses to write a proper reply to her own fiancé. Muttering incoherently under her breath, a slightly guilty Aletta hopelessly admits she simply cannot think of a single appropriate thing to write back. Sighing heavily, Frio strictly warns the stubborn girl that her continued negligence will eventually shatter Louis's dwindling patience, even within a purely political marriage. Frio deeply ponders the legendary hero's bloodline, realizing its fierce protective instinct completely contradicts a supposedly vital engagement meant to ensure the royal family's survival. A sudden, massive realization fiercely strikes Frio as he visually confirms Aletta holds absolutely zero genuine romantic interest in her new royal partner. He rationally deduces that her willing acceptance means the engagement itself is not fundamentally wrong, yet a nagging suspicion intensely lingers in his mind. A crucial memory forcefully surfaces as Frio vividly recalls her imposing father explicitly stating he had fully expected Frio to become the chosen fiancé. Frio fiercely hypothesizes that if Lady Oriana ruthlessly discarded his decade of dedication for a political union that ultimately fails the kingdom, the situation remains highly unstable. A massive surge of fiery hope ignites within his chest as he shockingly realizes this fragile, flawed engagement possesses a very real chance of completely shattering. The intense, emotionally charged flashback silently fades, grounding the epic narrative by revealing this crucial realization occurred exactly 2 years ago. Returning to the present, Lord August warmly praises Frio's swift, brilliant political maneuvering that successfully secured Gregory's highly advantageous, game-changing engagement. Lord August grimly notes Prince Alan's disastrous behavior at the party, but celebrates the massive political leverage gained by boldly forging ties with Duchess Madeline Alborasso. The proud patriarch deeply commends Frio, declaring that his decisive actions perfectly deterred plotting nobles and outright saved the entire country from an impending, catastrophic collapse. Releasing a heavy, exhausted sigh, Lord August bitterly complains that the pathetic royal family desperately needs to put in significantly more effort to govern themselves. Seizing the rare, triumphant moment, a highly determined Frio respectfully interrupts the commanding patriarch to confidently shift the heavy political conversation. Staring fiercely into the older man's eyes, Frio openly confesses his unwavering, 2-year devotion and boldly requests a formal recommendation to become Aletta's next official fiancé. A gentle smile suddenly softens Lord August's rugged face as he admits he was deeply disappointed by Frio's previous withdrawal, having always secretly hoped he would become Aletta's husband. Reaffirming his absolute, unyielding dedication, Frio passionately repeats his heartfelt vow that he entirely refused to surrender his deep, burning love for Aletta over the past 2 agonizing years. The formidable patriarch nods with immense approval, firmly reiterating his profound, lingering desire to see the brilliant young man finally and officially join their legendary family. Calling the young man warmly by his name, Lord August enthusiastically promises to gladly propose the formal engagement to both Frio's mother and the incredibly strict Lady Oriana. Tears of sheer, overwhelming relief prick Frio's eyes as the towering Bergheit's patriarch warmly praises him for never surrendering his enduring, desperate hope. Overcome with profound, breathless gratitude, Frio mentally celebrates the massive, life-altering victory of finally earning the terrifying father's complete and undeniable blessing. A fierce, unshakable determination violently blazes within Frio's tear-filled eyes as he tightly clenches his fists in pure, unadulterated anticipation. With his long, grueling path finally cleared, Frio passionately vows to himself that he can finally confess his true, absolute love directly to Aletta.